Hey, it's Josh. I wanted to do another video. This one will be shorter than the last one. I have several video ideas that I want to do. I have a video idea of talking about masculinity in Japan and how it's different than from what I'm used to being from the Midwest. I wanted to talk a little bit about how transgender people are perceived in Japanese society, and I also wanted to talk a little bit about some of my experiences in Japan that have nothing to do with being transgender, like, for example, how I was in Tohoku during the 3/11 earthquake. And I actually have 3 videos planned to talk about that, and each would be about 20 minutes long. I just haven't filmed them yet. But what I wanted to first talk about now is what I've noticed of why I came to Japan and why a lot of transgender people come to Japan. What happened, one of the things that I noticed was, sorry, you can see my binder. What I noticed was that, well, when I was an exchange student in Osaka, I was in Osaka about 8 years ago, I'm sorry, 11 years ago, as an exchange student, and I was there for 4 months, 1 semester, and I had a group of friends that I hung out with while I was there that were other foreigners, mostly Americans. And of this group that was not terribly big, less than 10 people, at least 3 of us are not cis. And none of us were out at the time. And this is something that has come up afterwards, that I found out afterwards. The one person that I am still in contact with, she came out as a trans woman a few years ago and has transitioned, and was actually one of the first, well, she was definitely the first friend of mine to transition. And so that had a huge effect on me. And I was really glad that she came out, and really glad that that we had been friends. I wish we lived closer to each other so we could hang out, because I think she's really awesome. When we hung out, when we were exchange students, sometimes I would go to her room, which was in the boys' dormitory, and I was the girl checking in to hang out with him. And so there was this like dorm mother who was controlling the check-in, and she would give me these looks like, "Oh, is he your boyfriend?" And I'd be like, "No, no." And it has since turned out that she's a lesbian. And I, at the time, identified as a lesbian, but I don't anymore. Partly because I'm not female, and partly because actually I don't exclusively like girls, but that was not something I was really comfortable with at the time, because I didn't want to be in a relationship with a guy as with someone is perceiving me as female. And so yeah, but anyway, there was also another person in the group who I don't have contact with, but I have been told is in the genderqueer spectrum. I'm not entirely sure. And I thought that was really interesting, of the small group of people, that there's the 3 of us. And then, so recently I joined a support group for transgender foreigners living in Japan. And there's a fair amount of people who also had not dealt with their identity before coming to Japan, and then dealt with it while in Japan. And I was wondering, is this just because there's so many foreigners in Japan that there's going to be a certain percentage of us not being cis? Because, there's a certain percentage of the population that's not cis. Or is there something about Japan in particular that attracts people? And I think it's the latter. And I have several theories about that. First of all, I know I was not dealing with my problems when I came over to Japan. I was trying to run from them, and I was trying to run from how society perceived me. So And so I was going to a different society where I would be perceived differently. I was still being perceived as female, though, and so I still had female dysphoria, social dysphoria. And it was actually worse because the lines in Japan are much more structured. Women do this, men do this. And it's a lot less common for men and women to be friends with each other. Though, in general, among the foreigners that come to Japan, the foreigners that come to Japan tend to be really cool, tend to be more worldly, tend to be a bit more tolerant, open-minded. If you're going to leave your country and go to another country, well, you're interested in other countries, and you want to learn about new things, and you want to meet new people and explore new things and things like that. And so, in general, most of the people who've come here tend to be the more adventurous, more educated, but more willing to learn people from their home countries, and are not really necessarily representative of their home countries. Like your average American that you meet while you're in Japan is a lot different than, say, your average American. And so that is true. I also think that a lot of the people that come to Japan because they don't necessarily fit in the U.S. or their home countries completely. I think if you are in your home country and you totally love it and you're totally comfortable and you have things set up pretty well and everything, you're less likely to want to go to a different place. If you are feeling like maybe this isn't for you, this isn't your place, this isn't where you're totally comfortable, if there's might be some place that's better for you, then you're probably more likely to say, hey, maybe I should move to Asia for a while. Get this teaching job and explore around, see if maybe someplace else is better for me. There's also a lot of people who come here avoiding their problems. I came here because I was avoiding my problems. I know other people who came here because they were in bad relationships and they were kind of hoping that this would be the straw that finally breaks the camel's back in terms of getting out of those bad relationships. I know one person who came to Japan because she was in a bad marriage and she was half hoping her husband would not follow her, and he did, actually, and she has since left Japan and he is still here and they are no longer married. And in that case, it does seem to have been the best thing for both of them that they came here. But that was kind of an extreme example. But I do know other people who left their significant others back home hoping that the stress of a long distance relationship would either show that they were meant to be together, or that they should break up, or be an easy way to break up. And I've seen both of those things happen. I've seen people come here trying to escape depression and then ending up going back to the U.S. to get treatment for depression. I've seen people coming to Japan who had a variety of different issues, and Japan either helping or exacerbating. And usually Japan, being in a stressful foreign environment will exacerbate other issues. Sorry, my posture is bad. And I think that is part of it. I also think that there is this concept that maybe Japan is more accepting of people who do not fit into traditional gender roles. And I do not think that is actually true. But what I think is happening with, for example, anime and manga, first of all, the people who are making anime and manga are, it's like animators in the U.S. Matt Groening is not representative of the average American. He's kind of a weirdo in a good way, but yeah, and the same thing with like the South Park guys, all these other people that are making and cartoons in the US are not representative of the entire culture. It's the same thing as going on in Japan. It's the strange people who are making anime and manga, and there's nothing wrong with that. But then you get into the average Japanese society, and you see what kind of pushes people into that escapism, trying to get away from what the whole society is like. You also get the fact that we as foreigners, when we're reading anime, or reading manga, watching anime, are missing some of the cultural context for things. And so there are these gender roles, relationship, stratification stuff going on that we're not necessarily picking up on. There might be lost in the translation. And so it's not the same thing as what's going on in the US, so we're not picking up on it. I'm sorry, my computer's making noise. I'm sorry if you can hear the beeping. I'm not really sure what that is. I think it's my mouse is getting jolted and it's going in and out, but whatever. Anyway, so also the lines of what's acceptable for male behavior and what's acceptable for female behavior are different in Japan than in the US. And of course in the US it depends on what part of the US you're in. My experiences being from the Midwest are vastly different than someone who's from New York, vastly different from somebody who's from Texas. But there's the field of things that are acceptable for men to do in Japan is probably much, much bigger than in the US. I would also say the field of acceptable behavior for women is not the same as what you see in anime. And I think what you see in anime often is escapism, because there is still a lot of these things in the culture, in the society, that is, it's really hard for women. An example that I would give in the US of being, if you watched the movie Alien, which is from the 70s, it has Sigourney Weaver being really awesome and tough and everything. But if, say, a woman wanted to be in the military during that time period, it still would have been really difficult and really hard, and she probably wouldn't have been able to do it. And but then from an outsider's perspective, all they're seeing is this movie that has a really kick-ass female character in it, and it's not representative of what the society is actually like. And I think that's a good analogy, because I think that in many ways for gender roles in Japan, I think Japan is about 30 years behind the US. And I see a lot of things in Mad Men that are more like what they're in Japan, more like how Japan is now than it used to be, especially with men. I have not experienced this personally because I'm still being perceived as female, but a lot of my male friends have told me that their Japanese coworkers have told them things that, like, about what mistresses that they have, or I took the mouse out, it shouldn't be an issue anymore, like what strip clubs they go to, or the male coworkers all going to a strip club together, or things like that. And we're talking about teachers and stuff like that fell out of being acceptable a long time ago. I guess it depends on where but still, and in terms of what's expected for women, women are expected they still have jobs until they get married, and then either they quit their job or they quit their job once they get pregnant. And then in Japan, often a lot of women will go back to work after their kids have started school. They usually will get maybe a part-time job, and then after the kids have left home, then they might go back into a full-time job. But you don't really... It's becoming more and more of a thing of having two parents working full-time, but it's still more like how things were in, say, 1985 in the US than how they are now. It is also still much, much harder for women to get into certain fields, and certain fields are still considered men only, and certain fields are women only, and it's very stratified. And I've said, the lines are different though, so we don't see this as outsiders, so it seems like it would be more acceptable to be gender non-conforming in Japan, just from what we can see. And then you get into here and it's really not like that at all. And there's still like the expectations that my students have for me of what my future would be like involve me getting married to a man and having kids. And personally, I would not be against either of those things, but that would be a gay relationship, and they don't realize that. But it's complicated. But they don't know about my gender identity, but still, I would not want to stop working, and I would not be a mother, and I would not be a housewife and things like that. It's completely not what I want whatsoever. I mean, granted, if I could marry someone who was incredibly, incredibly rich, and then I could just stay at home and write comic books and stuff, that sounds pretty good. But I'd still probably want to get a housekeeper, because I'm really terrible at keeping things clean and stuff like that. So yeah. So anyway, that was kind of my rambling thing of why I think a lot of foreigners come to Japan. And later on I will talk a little bit about some of the things that I've experienced in Japan as someone who's gender non-conforming, or what it's like to be transgender here. As much as I can say that I still haven't socially transitioned, but I feel like that's enough for now. Have a good evening. Thank you for watching. Bye.